Welcome to the Simpler Trading Podcast.
Welcome. Today we have Raghee Horner with us on the podcast. How are you today, Raghee?
Hey there, Chris. I'm doing good.
Excellent. So I thought we'd start, if you would, giving us a little bit of your background in the trading realm.
Well, I was born on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, so it was natural that I had zero. None of my family were traders, and my mom actually ended up becoming quite a very astute and active investor, quite by accident and quite by necessity.
This was before you got into it?
This was probably 3 to 4 years before I got into it.
Okay.
And her deal with me was that if I decided to get a job in high school, that I would have to give her 25% of what I made, and she would invest it in the market. And that's where I first started to get interested in the market, because I wanted to prove to her that she was taking this 25% and it was losing money. Of course, being a jerky little, 14, 15-year-old kid. And I found that my money was growing without me doing anything, and that was just this huge epiphany. And I started getting more interested in the markets. And then, like anything else, I think something as quirky as becoming a trader is probably a series of coincidences, meeting the right people, getting curious in the right time. And, if you believe in Malcolm Gladwell's theory on success and outliers, timing is everything.
Right.
And I got into the markets and commodities during a pretty interesting time in the late 80s. And then in the early 90s, I started getting into day trading, and direct access trading became available. Then in the late 90s to early 2000s, we started getting electronic access to the commodities markets. Forex became available. So I think timing was on my side. And here I am, 25 years later.
Excellent. And what is your primary focus right now?
I think most people know me as a currency or Forex trader, but what people don't really know is my background, and most of my trading early on was in futures, commodity futures. So while I do a lot of currency trading, that commodity futures background is never too far in my rear view, because so much of what I do in currency trading and global finance is going to hinge on what's happening in equities markets and key commodities markets, and bringing that futures experience with me to the currency world, where I've found a lot of currency traders don't really have a background trading futures, and key, what I call Forextra futures, has given me a huge advantage. So I would say it's currencies, but I'll throw in a handful of key futures in there as well.
Interesting. And do you consider yourself primarily a fundamental trader or a technical trader, or both?
I think early on, I was purely a chartist. I thought anybody who did anything apart from the charts was just, a dolt. And I think what happens is all traders kind of start off, I call it Yankees versus Red Sox, because, you pick a team and that's your team and you root against everybody else, right?
Right.
And I found that was just, dumb, because at the end of the day, I realized the market could, what I noticed was that the market could move off any three stimulus. I mean, there could be those days the fundamental narrative moved the market, and there could be those days we crossed key price thresholds, and that moved the market. And there could be those rarer days, but there could be those days where technically something happened, usually involving a 50 and a 200 period simple moving average, and that moved the market. And I thought, well, why am I looking at only one aspect of the market when there's really three? And let me find a way to mix it. And my best analogy for this, for those of you out there that are, say, MMA fans, you realize that first of all, it was style versus style. So in our world, is say fundamental traders got the octagon against a chartist. But what you're finding now amongst these fighters is that they can do everything.
Right.
And that's what I really encourage people to do. You have to have a good stand-up game. You have to have a good ground game. Otherwise, you will lose against the market.
Right, absolutely. What are your favorite currencies, or what are your favorite things to trade right now?
Right now, I'd have to say my favorite narratives post-election going into 2017 continue to be likely gold. I know some people might say, gold to currency? Gang, gold is a currency. Yes, absolutely. Okay. It behaves more like a currency than it does that yellow precious metal. So I'm a big fan of trading gold right now. Okay. Also the euro and the U.S. dollar, for obvious reasons. The dollar, I think, is still going to be propelled higher by what we have to consider is the most hawkish central bank of the majors. And if the dollar heads higher, that euro is going to continue to sink. And then there's some interesting commodity stories, and I think selling Australian dollar is going to still work in the early part of 2017. So I'm going to be sticking with that narrative as well. And then we'll just see what President-elect Trump brings us early next year. I think it's going to be a great trading year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree with that. And for people that are just getting started in this realm, what are your feelings on some of the ETFs? I mean, obviously there's a gold ETF that's has quite a bit of volume, but in terms of, I know there's currency ETFs, but what's the easiest kind of route, in your opinion, to get started for traders?
I think a lot of times traders find a vehicle that they love, meaning they fall in love with Forex, or they fall in love with futures, they fall in love with equities. I'm less interested in telling people how to execute an idea, and I'm more interested in making sure they have an idea. So if they like gold and they live abroad, a lot of the members for Simpler Forex don't live in the U.S., so
Right.
they have access to spot gold via XAU, and they have tremendous tax advantage and a 24-hour market and liquidity unlike anything else. They'll go ahead and execute that idea there. If you're in the U.S., I'm going to go with the gold futures contracts. People who have an equities trading account and they're comfortable, they can go execute that idea in GLD. So I'm a big fan, of having multiple ways, multiple vehicles that you can execute an idea, and there are plenty of currency share ETFs. When I'm playing the currency share ETFs, I'll also talk about currency futures, and then I'll also mention the spot. But I think the one thing to remember, especially pertaining to currencies, is that the largest marketplace for currencies is still the Forex.
Right.
That's still the interbank exchange that dwarfs everything else by a landslide in terms of size, and that's where the most opinion is kept. So if you're trading, for example, the Euro ETF, the FXE, or even EC futures, you're still going to be better off looking at what's happening in the Forex markets, in Euro versus US dollar, and then going and executing that idea in that other symbol.
Okay.
You still want to keep an eye on the main action.
Right. Now, is that would you consider that kind of the deep end of the pool, though, in terms of actually trading in those markets?
Deep end the pool, in what way?
I've just, I've dabbled in there, but it seems like that's this institutional space primarily. Is that a fair assessment?
It's interesting. I think a lot of people are intimidated in terms of maybe I'm not reading intimidation right, because I know you're scared of nothing, Chris. But I know some people out there might be intimidated by Forex. I think what happens is, because people think there's a certain amount of maybe that institutional or bank level manipulation, I will say, because it is so big and because it's off exchange, I do believe there's a level of, just because of its size, it's harder to go, and I call them shenanigans.
Right.
There's fewer shenanigans, I believe, in the Forex market, and I'll just cite this, and it's a scary thought, but the Forex markets are very heavily regulated in the U.S., and for good reason. They're perceived as the wild, wild west, but we've had more kind of shenanigans happen with major futures brokers, not the Forex brokers,
Right.
Which is to say, I think most people are nervous about Forex, not because of the market, but because of the misunderstanding about regulations for the brokers.
Sure, absolutely. All right, well, thank you. Any parting thoughts for us?
Trade Forex. No, I'm kidding. I think
Well, absolutely.
If I could impress upon anybody a single idea, it's this. Don't become a specialist in terms of a single market or a single symbol or a single time frame. You're not going to have a long career doing that, and I know that's probably contrary advice to what most people say, which is specialize in something, get really good at this one thing. The market's going to tell you where your attention should be, and the market's going to tell you how you should trade it, whether that be, fading price action or following a trend. And I think if you're more, in flow with what the market's telling you, and you're less rigid about the dogma of it, I would basically say, if we know the fact of this fact, 90% of traders fail, right? That's a
Right.
fact. We're all told. Find out what 90% of traders do, and just don't do that.
Do the opposite. We like that contrary advice.
Pretty much. So that's what I would want to impress upon everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
For more information, visit simplertrading.com.